With the start of the Scholomance Academy reveal season well underway, we've seen a variety of very intriguing new cards. Today we'll be taking a similar look at a highly discussed card from the expansion, Sphere of Sapience. This card is completely different than any other card throughout Hearthstone's history, and exploring its potential is a challenging task because of that. But that's exactly the task we'll be undertaking today. Before we begin, remember to subscribe to the Tempo Strategy channel as well as turn notifications on in order to stay up to date with all of our upcoming Scholomance Academy content. First, let's discuss the card Sphere of Sapience itself and what it's capable of, and then we'll move on to look at what sort of decks it might belong in. A 1-mana 0/4 weapon, Sphere of Sapience is interestingly the first neutral weapon ever printed, but obviously because of its 0 attack, its status as a weapon is far from its most important feature. The card reads, at the start of your turn, look at your top card. You can put it on the bottom and lose 1 durability. So when looking at this card, the first and most obvious thing we notice is that its purpose is to increase the quality of the cards you draw. Many decks run cards that are only included for specific matchups, or expensive cards that you can't afford to draw too early. Even with cards that aren't exactly situational, there are some times where they simply don't have an application in a matchup. For example, say you are playing Galakron Priest against Quest Warlock, you would absolutely love to be able to put your Penance back into your deck on turn 2 and draw a different card instead. Despite Penance being a very powerful anti-aggro card in Galakron Priest, a control deck, in the matchup against Quest Warlock, the Priest has to try and turn itself into a pressure deck and doesn't have a use for Penance. Of course, there's also an obvious downside to playing Sphere of Sapience in that in exchange for improving your hand quality, it reduces your hand size. Generally, whenever you expend a card that reduces your hand size, there is some tangible effect on the board that you receive in return. Either you develop a minion or buff a minion, or remove an opponent's minion or something of that sort. And at least in a direct matter, Sphere of Sapience doesn't do anything. So the challenge becomes finding a deck for it where increased quality of draws outweighs an increased quantity of cards. Oftentimes when trying to evaluate a new card, especially one as unique as Sphere of Sapience, it is a useful tool to find some already existing cards to make comparisons to in order to better understand how the new card will function once it's actually being played. The 2 cards that seem the most useful in this case are Plot Twist and Tracking. First, let's talk about Plot Twist, a card which should be seen as an ominous sign for Sphere of Sapience. While Plot Twist does see play in Standard right now, that is solely due to its synergy with Supreme Archaeology and Aranasi Broodmother. Before these cards were prevalent, Plot Twist saw no play on its own, and on its own is where it's similar to Sphere of Sapience. Both are cards which are meant to improve your hand quality at the expense of losing 1 hand size. And while Plot Twist does have the downside of being less controlled and more random, you don't get choices as to which cards you want to keep and which cards you want to cycle. It also has the upside of being an immediate effect which doesn't require multiple turns to improve your hand quality. If we look at improving hand quality through the traditional Hearthstone terms of tempo and value, Sphere of Sapience gives far more hand quality value, whereas Plot Twist functions as a lower value option which provides more tempo, allowing you to dig through your deck immediately for specific answers in tough spots. There is no doubt that Sphere of Sapience is more powerful than Plot Twist when you are able to find it in your opening hand, but it also quickly falls off in usefulness as the game goes on and ends up being a useless top deck in the late game. Time will tell if the strength of drawing the card on turn 1 makes it worth risking drawing it later other times. Now let's compare to Tracking. Tracking is another 1-mana card which is designed to improve your hand quality, allowing you to look at 3 cards and pick the best one, but it does not come with the downside of reducing your hand size, which is a really big deal. And in addition, it comes with very little tempo loss, as its full effect takes place on the turn the card is initially played. If Sphere of Sapience is active for a long while, there is no doubt that it improves your hand quality more than Tracking does, allowing you to filter out double the quantity of unwanted cards. However, this does not do nearly enough to make up for the tempo loss and the hand size loss that it has in comparison to Tracking. Fortunately for the prospects of Sphere of Sapience, it does not need to be better than Tracking to be playable or even strong. Tracking has been a staple in the vast majority of Hunter decks throughout Hearthstone's history, and Sphere of Sapience is also a neutral card, meaning it can fit into a much wider assortment of decks. When looking at the sort of decks which Sphere of Sapience might find its way into, the first thing that becomes apparent is that it can't really be an aggro card. Not only is the idea of losing a card from your hand a big deal for a sort of deck which already tends to run out of cards, but in an aggro deck you want to be fighting for board on turn 1, not playing a card which only has impact in the long term. However, though Sphere of Sapience doesn't want to be an aggro card, it does want to find its way into a curve deck, as the card's best use is to help you fill the gaps in your curve and make sure you are utilizing all your mana every turn after the turn you play it. Highlander decks seem to make a particularly good example of this sort of deck, and specifically specifically Highlander Mage since it has no 1-drops anyway, and also has enough top end to not need card advantage too desperately, especially when it finds its power spike cards. Another sort of curve deck which could use Sphere of Sapience well is a deck like Spell Druid, where all your powerful turns require specific combinations of cards, and where you could have plenty of cards to draw anyway. These two decks, Highlander Mage and Spell Druid, and any new decks of a similar mold are our top 2 picks for this card to slot into, though if the card ends up being more powerful than expected, it could also spread to decks like Galakron Priest and Highlander Hunter. The jury is still out on Sphere of Sapience. It could be a staple in a variety of powerful meta decks, or it could just be a genuinely unplayable card in every situation. Only time and experimentation will tell about that, but in the meantime, let us know in the comments what decks you are looking forward to trying this new card in, and please remember to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell to see all of our upcoming Hearthstone content.